Hello again, my friends, and thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. We have a very special guest with us here today, and she'll share some of the best books that she uses in her classroom, some that she wants to use, tips for engaging students, along with some fond memories she's had in her teaching career. This episode is packed with tons of value, so please feel free to share it with anyone that might find it helpful. Let's start the show. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the Shining Scholar Education Podcast, where we talk about secondary English and language arts tips, strategies, and resources. We'll also share the ups and downs in the wonderful world of teaching. I'm your host, Charlie, and I'm a teacher creator here with Shining Scholar Education. We hope you enjoy the show. Hello again, my friends, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. This is a very special episode. We have the fearless English teacher, the one and only from Instagram, that I found, and she was kind enough to join us here on this episode today.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, the honor is all ours. And I was telling her briefly before we started recording that I couldn't believe she actually responded to our invite to be on the podcast. So that was like a dream come true. I had to do a double take and make sure I wasn't, imagining things. So that's really awesome. Based on her Instagram, she is super passionate about teaching English. I believe she teaches high school. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And her pictures are all about books, awesome ideas she has, lessons, and the way she's reached her kids. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just like a little intro. I teach at a career center, so I teach high school English for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. So they change our schedule every semester, every year. So the great part of that is that I feel like I'm a very strong teacher in all three subjects. So it really helps, I feel like, bring together a lot of ideas I have and complexity levels. I know how to challenge my younger students and really guide, especially my seniors, off into the real world, which is...
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
and what do you like notice more, especially a lot of listeners, I believe, are like first year teachers or like just starting their career. What have you noticed like is the biggest difference between 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders?
I really love they're all so different. So teaching 10, 11, and 12, just maturity level is so funny between each grade level. Like the 10th graders, they are so usually off the walls with their energy. They're just excited to be there usually. And my 10th graders, they're so fun with the energy they bring to my class. That's a class where I know that I can throw all of my engaging ideas like making Instagram posts and stuff like that, and those kids will just eat it up, especially if I'm able to connect with them and get them to trust me. That's where 10th graders are probably my favorite in that way. But we'll see. Maybe after 20 years of teaching sophomores, I'll be like, okay, your energy's a little bit too much for me. But for now, it's so fun. And then 11th graders, they are definitely more calm. I think they think they're cooler because they're not the new kids in the school, because our school's only 10, 11, and 12. So my juniors, I love having juniors. They're a little bit more mature. And then I noticed that my seniors, which when I was initially started teaching, I was terrified to teach seniors, and I taught them my first year of teaching. And I wore heels every single day because I'm only 5'1", and I was just so scared. I was like, these kids are only like 4 years younger than me. I have a younger sister who's younger than them. I feel like they can smell my fear. So I was so scared to teach seniors, but they ended up being some of my favorite classes that I taught because they're so mature and they're just driven at that point. Like of course, they're senioritis, but they know what they have to do to graduate, and that's all they care about. So they sometimes end up being the most focused, which is nice.
That's right. And if I could take a moment to give a shout out to all of those, if there are any, high school seniors or older students listening to this, props to you and thank you for tuning in. And a shout out to you guys doing it with jobs. And a lot of times we've had, young parents and they're juggling all these things and they're still doing what they got to do. So we as teachers notice that, guys, and we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And it seems like you have an endless supply of ideas, judging by your Instagram. It seems like maybe you have too many. And is it hard to choose what to focus on, or how do you do that?
It's so whenever I decide what I want to teach my students, I have a process. So anytime I want to bring a new book into my curriculum, I first read the book totally uninterrupted, and then I just take notes as I go. So in all of my novel studies I create, for other teachers and for myself, I create unit plans that have a summary and a deeper analysis and then discussion questions. That way,
Mm-hmm.
because I can read a book like 5 times, but of course, when you actually are teaching it, it's harder to be able to go back in the book every single night to reread it, to remember exactly what you're supposed to be talking about that day. So I
Right.
always make a guide where I have like chapter by chapter, this is what happened, summary briefly, deeper analysis, what do I really want to talk to my students about? What do I really want to dig into? And then I use discussion questions as I go along for my own use, really. But then from there, I take the key elements in the novel that I want my kids to take away from it. So, of course, there's the content I want them to grasp. There's all kinds of vocabulary I always want them to grasp and new concepts. But ultimately, something that I wanted when I became a teacher was that I really wanted to give my kids life lessons, something out of any book, no matter how old it is, that you can take and make it relevant to their life now, because that's how you get kids to care about stuff. If you hand them like
Mm-hmm.
1984, for example, since I was talking about that earlier with my seniors that I'm going to teach this year, if you teach it just straight from the book, you don't connect it to modern day, they'll be like, why are we even reading about this? Like, there's no Big Brother society. But then if
Right.
you work hard to create activities that make sense to them and connect it to modern day, they can see all the different parallels. And then it makes it more interesting to them. And there's all kinds of concepts that they learn that they can address in their own lives based on books that we read. So I really create activities based on key core concepts I want them to learn from the book and life lessons. And then I try to make those activities something relevant to their lives that they would enjoy, I guess, really doing, and then can think bigger about it.
Awesome. And then have they drawn any connections to their lives or to real lives from 1984 that just kind of stick out in your mind? Anything notable?
Well, that's a new book, so I have not taught it yet with my
Oh.
students. So, but I can think of with my sophomores, one of my most memorable kind of discussions. I had learning stations with my students for the book Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I'm not sure if you read
Mm-hmm.
that book or seen the movie, but it's just about this kid, Charlie, who has a lot of different mental health issues that he really suppresses. And he just kind of tells the story of his life through letters. And it's very, very interesting to analyze. But I did this activity with my students called a blind quote analysis. And with that, I took six different quotes from the chapter we were reading from, and I just put them in envelopes. And then I gave my students this worksheet I created that has to do with like what's the message of the quote, what's the context of the quote, and they just had to really analyze it deeper. And then from there, they had to pick one of the quotes, so one of the six that really spoke to them. So I chose some of my favorite quotes. Like one of the most popular ones from that book is we accept the love we think we deserve. So I love to use that, especially with teenagers. Like I use them with my sophomores, like 15, 16 years old, where they think that their friendships and their significant others that they're dating are long term. And they don't realize,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, like once you grow up, that a lot of that doesn't really matter anymore. But for them, when they're in it, they feel like it's so intense. So if they're having
Mm-hmm.
friendship problems or relationship problems, it's devastating for them and they have a hard time processing that. So,
Right.
one of my favorite things with this blind quote analysis I did with them, I remember there was a student who chose the quote, "We accept the love we think we deserve," as her main quote that she wanted to analyze. And then we worked in kind of stations for discussion after that. And I sat with them and I was like, so, like, what quote really spoke to you and why? And she just gave this whole narrative about how she's like, I feel like this quote just really made me take a look at my life and look at myself and really realize that I don't have high enough expectations for myself. And she had this whole revelation and it
Wow.
was just so beautiful and I loved it. So I feel like that's really the power of what novels can do in a classroom setting.
Right, right. That's a deep introspective event to happen in your classroom. I can only imagine how rewarding
Yeah.
that was for both of you folks.
Yeah, it really
That's
was.
incredible.
Those are the moments I fight for, you know? Like, I really want
Right,
those moments in my classroom.
right. And those kind of balance out 1,000 negative moments, right? Or is it right? That's how it
Exactly.
is for me. It's like that one
Yes,
victory. It's like, yeah, all those other little battles, yeah, it was bad or negative or whatever, and then that one little thing, and that's like it outshines everything else in the negativity.
that's so true. Those are the little moments that keep us going through all the hard times.
That's exactly right, and I'm a huge fan of quotes. I'm always just, I guess I barely say anything that's an original thought because I'm always quoting people on this podcast, but I always
I
feel like,
love that.
if they've said it much better than me, why am I gonna
Right.
stammer over a paragraph when they just put it perfectly in one sentence, and I
For
think
sure.
that that's powerful, to pick just even single line quotes, like, what was it? You get the love you think you deserve?
Yeah, yeah. We accept the love we think we deserve. Yeah.
There it is, just a handful of words, and it could be the catalyst for 1,000 different ideas, and that's
Oh,
beautiful.
yeah. I love it too because it brings in all the different interpretations and perspectives that the world lives on. And then you can bring it into your English class and discuss it. Because
Mhm.
maybe some students analyze that quote completely differently. They interpret it totally differently. So that's what I love about literature in general. There's so much you can learn from other people and the way that they perceive something that you perceive too.
Right, right. No, and it's a beautiful thing. Have you ever read or heard about, Joseph Campbell's work on the monomyth and the hero's journey and all that?
No.
No, it's an incredible this guy is a mythologist, and he studied mythologies from all over the world, all cultures, and he found that they all have the same type of heroic, story structure, like, and he said George Lucas took it and made the Star Wars, franchise because it starts
Mhm.
off with, somebody that's challenged from his normal life, then he finds a mentor, then he finds obstacles, and he fails at first, but then he has a choice, either sink or swim, and you got to
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful, beautiful cycle, and I think, uh through stories like you were saying earlier, even though it's maybe a book set from an older time or like past generations, modern times, it's kind of like the same story being retold with different names, different faces. And yeah, maybe the details are a little different, but the human connection is still there. And I think that's why, the young people of today can still connect to these stories.
I completely agree. Yeah, I love that.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, we could talk about books, probably for
For
hours.
sure.
Uh, and And I'd hate to digress from anything like that. Does that lead you to anything else that you'd like to talk about? I feel like it kinda leads into your work with Dear Martin.
Oh, yes. Dear Martin, especially with the huge uproar in the Black Lives Matter movement this summer, I just really sat back and reflected. And I was like, I feel like my role in this movement is the most powerful thing I can do is bring literature into my classroom that's inspired from this movement. So I read Dear Martin. I thought it was perfect. And I'm actually teaching it to my sophomores and my seniors this year. So I'm really, really excited about it. I spent the whole summer just really deep diving into everything about the movement, everything about just racism as a whole in this country and how our society functions in it. And it's so eye opening. And a lot of it I was already aware of. I've read a lot of like The Hate You Give and everything like that. But Dear Martin just spoke differently to me because when I read it, I was like, this is something I feel confident taking into my classroom. And it's
Mhm.
hard, really. I had a hard time convincing myself that I was capable of being able to teach the concepts in this book well because I'm a white teacher and I live in a predominantly white area. I live in Northwest
Mhm.
Ohio, so a lot of my students live out in the country and they have kind of some stereotypical views about it. But those
Mhm.
are the kids that I feel it's my duty to reach and just open their eyes about what's happening to people who are different from them. So that's what it's like. It really, this movement, the uproar in the movement this summer really gave me the courage to just research the best I can, to do the best I can to teach this book, because I owe it to the community and I owe it as an educator. Like, this is my role, where if I'm not going to do it, who is going to do it for these kids?
Right, right. And that's a wonderful thing to kind of raise the consciousness level of these things that are going on, that they might not have that much what's the word, like connection to, or like personal connection
Mhm.
to, because it's not their fault, but if they're not around it, they might not be aware of the things that are going on and the significance and the symbolism of them. And I think that that's a wonderful way of connecting them with current events and then connecting it to literature.
Yeah, thank you. That's what my hope is. So, yeah, I mean, it's my first year teaching it. I feel prepared. I'm always worried that I'm going to make a mistake, or a student is going to try to make it political, and then it's just going to be hard to diffuse. But that's what I spent the
Hmm.
summer preparing, that I'm ready for those moments. And I'm ready to make mistakes, because it's okay to make mistakes in those kinds of conversations. That's the start of the conversation that's productive
Right,
between a teacher and students. So
right.
I'm
That's
I'm hoping it
exactly
goes
right.
really well.
Yeah, and I think that's something we face as educators, that sometimes the edgy, the dangerous stuff is where the learning really comes from. You know what I mean? It's like, because
Yeah,
the stakes are so high, it's kind of like there's a lesson to be learned, and we all learn, even as teachers. I don't know if your students always kind of think that the teacher is like the know-it-all, and I'm telling them all the time, the things I fail, the things I'm constantly trying to get better at. Don't think that just because we're up here that we're, like, oh, I learned everything I need to learn and nothing else. I'm just going to pass on my knowledge. No, we're constant. The best teachers, I think, are always students first.
exactly. I always try to be transparent about that too, and I think especially with Dear Martin, it'll be the same thing where I'll be like, I'm still learning. If you have any kind of useful opinion or suggestion, I would love to hear that, because I don't know it all, and I can research all I want, but I mean, you're constantly growing as a teacher, and I love that about teaching, and I think my students know that too. That I'm always
Hmm.
willing to listen to them and take their suggestions.
That's great, and I think that's one of the best strategies for teaching, is modeling that humility, that we don't know everything. You know what I mean? And you're teaching
For
us as much
sure.
as we're trying to teach you. For sure.
Exactly. The amount of perspectives I've heard when we had classroom discussions, I think is fascinating. Like, I think about every year that I teach the Glass Castle, I love teaching it because I learn so much from my students just in discussions. Where the book is a lot about Jeanette Walls. It's a memoir. I don't know if you read it or not, but
No, I haven't. No.
oh yeah, so she's amazing. I love her. The story is all about her life, growing up in poverty, but her parents always made their crazy, crazy life together feel like it was an adventure. And so there's a lot of controversy with, are her parents good parents or bad parents, based on the decisions that they make for their children and their own
Hmm.
personal demons they have, like alcoholism and mental health issues, that are
Mm.
never really like dealt with. And it's super fascinating. And so for me, I come from a pretty stable life, like a middle class kind of upbringing. So I do everything
Hmm.
I can to really try to inquire with my students these questions of, can you imagine just moving every single month and sometimes not even having anywhere to live? You sleep in the desert. And I've had students who feel
Wow.
comfortable enough to share in the class be like, actually, I was homeless for a while, and I see a lot of parallels between this story and my life. Or a lot of students will say, like, my parents also suffered from some of the things that Rex and Rosemary Walls have been through. And while I have resented them, like, I've grown from that. Or even sometimes it's, I've resented them and I've moved out of my parents' house to create a better life for myself. So that's the part of where I'm only one person and I chose to be a teacher, but that does not mean that I have all the different life experiences to fit into these stories that I teach my students. And that's why them being there and being a part of it is so powerful and impactful, because they have all these different backgrounds and lives and goals for themselves that can contribute to
Hmm.
a really awesome classroom discussion.
Right. And the fact that they feel safe enough and comfortable enough to share that, with
Yeah.
everyone, that I would imagine the sense of community is just, through the roof.
My gosh, it makes my day whenever a student feels comfortable enough to say anything personal about their lives like that. It just makes me feel like I did something right as a teacher, that they feel safe enough to be able to
Right.
offer up their personal life experiences. Because sometimes it can be painful for students to bring that up if they did come from a life that's hard and maybe they have grown out of it, or maybe they're still in it. So it's really special when they feel that they can share that with the class.
Right, right. And I'll make sure to link to these books that we were speaking about, Dear Martin and The Glass Castle, in the show notes.
Oh
So
yeah,
if any
thank
listeners want
you.
to check it out, that sounds awesome. And so, what would you say is the biggest um, like attractive thing about The Glass Castle? Would you say?
Activity wise, or like the
Yeah,
concepts
yeah,
in
like
it?
lending itself for the classroom.
I really pride myself in the novels that I teach. I think that they have a bigger life lessons in them, where I really try to choose novels that give different perspectives from people who might be different from you. So Jeanette Walls, like, she had the craziest upbringing, like I said, and maybe in a community of mostly middle class students, although many are not middle class, it provides a different perspective for people, because it's interesting to hear how other people live and other people grow up. And even if they can't relate to it or understand it, it at least
Hmm.
makes them more perceptive to lives around them. So my goal is always, instead of being quick to judge people, um, to really be able to sit back and think, I wonder what they are going through right now. And it's the same with Dear Martin, about it. Just like, really, I care a lot about when my students graduate, I want them to just be self aware and be aware of what's happening in the world around them, and just being a good human. Like, so much of literature and English class is humanity and building
Hmm.
empathy for people other than yourself, and not just being so quick to judge anyone who has a different life from yours. Like, maybe there's more to the story.
Right, right. That sort of cultural relativism that can be explored through books and reading and poetry. That's beautiful. And I forget who, I'm pretty sure it was Stephen King. He said fiction is the truth inside a lie. And
Yeah, I
so
love
what I
that.
took that to mean, you know what I mean? Isn't that awesome? And like I said, I
So
mean, these guys,
awesome.
these authors, these writers just put it in words that you're just like, I don't even want to try to put it in my own way. That's just perfectly the way they said it.
Exactly.
And it reminds me of one, I think my most passionate book that I've ever read, and I've recommended to students. We haven't covered in class yet, but it's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I don't know if you've
Oh,
read that one.
I read it once when I was younger. I don't remember it as much anymore. I'll have to reread it.
Oh my goodness, that one, man. And I've given it to, so many students. And because what's pretty cool, from what I've seen, Paulo Coelho doesn't mind just giving away PDF copies of his book. Like, he pirates his own stuff apparently, and his publisher has gotten onto him, like, these are sales or whatever, and he's like, I wrote this story to tell the story, not
Yeah, for
necessarily to be
sure.
making all this money. Which to me, I was like, wow, that's really cool for an author to say. But I've given it to several students, and a few of them, they're like, oh, it was good, but I haven't finished it or whatever. But the ones that did finish, they were like, this is incredible, because it's like a fable, and it symbolizes life. All our concerns about fear, death,
Yeah.
love, being alone, belonging, all these things. And you just read it, and I'm like, wow. And it's one book that I can read over and over and still kind of, and it sounds cliche to catch something every time, but I really feel like he packs so much into this, book, that it's like to take it at different levels is a beautiful thing.
Oh, I love that. That kind of reminds me of Tuesdays with Maury. Have you read that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
just I that book, in a way, it's so simple just with how it's laid out and the authenticity of it, but it just makes me cry every single time because it's so beautiful, and the life lessons and the quotes that are involved just really it teaches you so much about life and death. And I think that it's so beautiful and like really like a lesson in that can be like, talk to people who know more than you, talk to people who are older or have different life experiences from you, and see all that you can learn from others. But it kind of
Right.
reminds me of what you were saying about how powerful a book can be with all of the different kind of details and storylines in it.
Yes, that's exactly right. And do you have a specific method of reaching kids? Let's say, I can't imagine a student not being engaged in your class, honestly, but let's
Oh,
just
I'm
say,
sure, for
hypothetically,
sure. They are
how
still
would you reel them
teenagers,
in?
so
That's true. That's true.
yeah. I really try to plan my lessons based on what I think that they would enjoy. So I really focus a lot on student relationships, and I care about that more than content a lot of the time. So if I
Mm,
feel like my class maybe like is really tense, or like kids are having a bad day and it's just kind of rubbing off on everyone else, or especially in the winter months in Ohio, it gets depressing. So I really kind of try to mix up the narrative of what an English class will look like. But
mhm,
to try to engage my students, I focus on the relationship. So I think I try to learn at least one kind of intimate detail about a student that is not super surface level. And then I use that to guide my instruction. So, like, for example, in one of my English classes last year, I always teach transcendentalism. I teach, about living in a cabin in the middle of the woods and like not having electronics and all that stuff. But last
mhm,
year, I had a class of all welders and mostly welders. And welders are extremely hands on. So if you remember, I work at a career center. I teach English there, so which is really, really cool. But um,
mhm,
the welders, so they love hands-on activities because it's what they do in their labs and it's what they want to do with their lives. So instead of trying to read them all these, which we do analyze short stories at the same time and like stuff like that, but I made our final project a tiny house project because I thought that that would be interesting to them. So instead of just having them kind of just read and answer some questions along the way, I really focused on this idea of you're going to get to create your own tiny house with transcendentalism values. So they got so excited about it. I showed them an episode, I think it was on Netflix, of like the tiny house movement. I can't remember exactly what the show was called, but we watched an
mhm.
episode and they were like, why do people live in these tiny houses? Why wouldn't you want a big house? And so we really read some articles about it. We talked about the financial aspects of it, and also the fact that you can be one with nature a lot of the time. People who live in tiny houses a lot of the time like to travel. They like to be out in the middle of nowhere. So it
Mhm.
was so cool for them to then, at the end of this unit, they created a final project where they could actually build their own tiny house, either electronically or through a building website, or they could create their own on a poster, or they could actually build their own out of their own materials. So it was so much fun, and they had a blast with it. And then we were able to connect it to transcendentalism based on all the different key elements that went into the project. Like it had to be based on environment and environmentally friendly plans. Like, and some
Mhm.
students are like, I could add a compost toilet. And I'm like, you go for it. So it was really, really cool. So I think that the way that I try to engage my students most is really reading the class and seeing how they would most enjoy literature. And then
Mhm.
something else that I just thought of this year that I threw into my Dear Martin unit, I was thinking about because my younger sister, she just finished her senior year in high school, and she just always has been talking about how she wants a tattoo. And I think that it's so funny because I'm like, I feel like when you're an adult, like people don't care as much about tattoos, but and in terms of like, oh wow, like I really want to get this tattoo, and oh that's so cool.
Mhm.
I feel like it's such a teenage thing to really want a tattoo because you need parent consent and it's harder to do and it's just trendy. And so I was like,
Uh-huh.
you know what would be so funny is if in Dear Martin, I use it for some sort of life lesson for character analysis. So at the end of the book, I have one of my final activities. There are two characters. I use Justice and Jared. They're super, super different, but they changed a lot through the novel. So at the end,
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking my students to create, based on this Instagram template that I made, they have to create an Instagram template from the perspective of either Justice or Jared. And then we're pretending that they got a tattoo after they learned all these different life lessons throughout the book. And it has to be a really like deep life lesson. Like, what is something that is so deep? What is a deep life lesson that you want to tattoo it on your body? Like, that's how much it has changed you as a person. So in the activity, we're pretending that one of the characters of your choice got a tattoo, and then you have to actually design it on the Instagram post. So it's like a little shoulder that you have to then draw the tattoo, which is symbolic because they're going to have to draw some sort of symbol. And then in the caption, they have to explain why the character got this tattoo from the character's perspective, which I think is always cool because you're putting yourself in the character's shoes, which makes you just think deeper
Right.
about it. So
Right.
I'm definitely not a wizard. I definitely have students who are still not engaged in my classroom, or they'll have days where they're on and days that they're off. But I know that I'm always trying my best to reach those kids, which is good enough for me.
Wow. I mean, talk about differentiation. You reached those welders. It sounded like you spoke their language and you really got them hooked, and I think that's a skill that, not to speak ill of any educators, but I think that's a skill that, I don't know, comes with time or training, or maybe it's a natural gift, but to be able to think on your feet like that, I don't think
Thank
that's a
you.
very common trait. That's pretty awesome. It's almost like you're really an edutainer. You've heard that word, and a magician.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
you're pulling flames and doves, and some
Yes,
people are like, some students are, it's okay, not bad. And you got to really kind of find, how to hook them in. But that's awesome. That sounds, and not only
thank
that, but
you.
it sounded like you brought in some biology and science related things, some cross
Yes,
curricular,
yeah.
across all things. And that's amazing. I mean, it's pretty cool how you can come up
Thanks.
with, such a great idea. And I've heard some other teachers say, the biggest challenges are my biggest rewards, because not only do I have to think on my feet, but it's like, okay, how much can I really, how good do I think I am versus how good I actually am, and they said it kind of showed
Exactly.
me that I thought I had this, in the bag, and no, there's still kids throwing, curveballs, and
For
I'm having
sure.
to figure them out. So that's
Yeah.
really awesome.
And it's funny because I always like, I really have been kind of this way of just, I feel like I try so hard all the time to engage my students. Like, it's almost kind of a funny thing with my teacher friends where they think I'm so over the top, but I'm kind of proud of that. And like, one of my mentors, she has talked to me before when I've come into her room after a long day where I tried really hard with an activity I thought my kids would love and it totally flopped. And I just go and sit and I'm like, I really wanted this to work out well, and I feel like the kids didn't like it, and I just feel like my time isn't appreciated, and I worked so hard, and you have those moments
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
teachers, and she's always like,
Hmm.
Alli, you can stand in front of your kids and do a bunch of cartwheels, and probably there will still be at least one that won't care. So there's
Hmm.
still humans and teenagers, and it's just so important to remember as teachers that you can't always please everyone, but if you can even please
Right.
at least one kid in there, like one kid is like, oh, that was cool, like I may be too cool to ever admit that that was a cool activity, I'm just going to sit here and think that was pretty cool, and for me that's
Right.
enough.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, they really, they're the kings of understatements, aren't they?
Oh, for sure.
They're like saying, "Hey, you're all right," when they're really trying to say, "Hey, you changed my life and I love
Oh
you.
my
Oh, you're
gosh,
okay,
right?
sir." You know?
So true. I even one time got a Christmas card from a student, which I love when they make me stuff, but it was this one kid who really did not seem interested in my class at all. But he ended up making this Christmas card for me, and he said something like, "Hey, I'm really going to miss your class this year. I'm really sad that English is only half a year and math is a full year because I hate math and English is all right." And to me, I like hung it up on my bulletin board. Like it said really
Yes.
like next to nothing, but to me, I was like, yes. And I hung that up on
Yes.
my bulletin board.
That means a lot. That means a lot,
It
especially
does.
with that population, and I think an eye-opening experience I had, just a quick aside, it was a kid and he was like, he had a constant growl. I mean, just like a frown. I'm sorry. He's just, just scowling all the time. But I was like, that's his personality. Let me just, hey, I'm here if you
Right.
need me, just let me know. And the principal saw him one morning and he was passing my class and the kid's like, sup, sir? And he kept going. And the principal was like, he talks to you? And I said, well, I mean, like he'll say like that. He was like, he hasn't said 2 words to anybody else. And I was like, wow, really? So even just that sup, sir was,
Yeah,
something.
that's something. I love that. These
Right,
kids have
right,
no
right.
clue how you want to win them over.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I remember sometime in the near past, there was something or other we got on tattoos, and I think the funniest. I swear, some of my kids are going to grow up to be stand-up comics because
Mhm.
this. It seemed like it was just like off the cuff. He was like, "Well, I'm thinking about getting one that says mom," and everybody's like, "Ah, that's so old," and blah blah blah. He's like, "No, no, no," because when I raise my arms, it's going to say "wow." And we were like, wow, you really put some thought into that. Yeah, he's like, I could be at a concert and it's like, wow. And then I'm sitting having dinner with my mom and it's all about mom.
That's amazing. I love that.
Isn't that funny? The things they come up with, I'm like, yes, feed that creativity. You know what I mean?
Yes. I love it too because stuff like that, it keeps you young. It keeps you like, life doesn't have to be so serious all the time. When you're older, you start to get set in a routine, and then a kid will say something like that, and you're like, okay, I just thank you for that. Like, you really just showed me it does not have to be that serious.
Right, right. Can you think about any other really funny or memorable moments in your teaching career?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. I feel like my kids make me laugh all the time. I can think of one of my favorite days with my students, one of the most meaningful days, which it sounds so simple, but I was with one of my classes and we were supposed to read our next section of The Glass Castle, actually. And it was a Friday, and I remember it was snowing really bad outside, and everyone was just like wanting to be home. And I could just sense that the mood was not there for the day. So I
Hmm.
was standing up in front of my kids. I was getting ready for us to start reading together. And I told them, I was like, you know what? Everyone, go ahead and get up and push your desks and your chairs off to the sides of the room. Like, just push everything out of the way. And so we have this big space in the middle of the room. All the chairs and tables were up, or desks were up against the walls. And I bought these tea lights, like 50 tea lights or something, just to have for like escape rooms and fun stuff like that whenever I want the room to model a certain vibe. And so
Hmm.
I told the kids to get their books and just sit in a circle on the floor. And some of them would like lay on their stomachs, some of them just sat, and I put the tea lights in a circle around everyone. And then I plugged in, I have these cute little bulb lights in the back of my room. I plugged those in, and then I turned on a campfire on my projector. And it just
Oh,
felt like
cool.
such a cool environment. And we just sat, and I was like, I just want to read like this today. I hope everyone's okay with that. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, that sounds so fun. And so we sat there and we read and discussed. I did not have them do any kind of study guide. I did not have them do any kind of pop quiz after or an activity, nothing. Like, we literally just sat and read authentically together and discussed. And it was probably one of my favorite moments in my teaching career because I think that so much of teaching English has to do with jumping through all these different hoops, like preparing for tests, preparing for this, preparing students for college or the career of
Hmm.
their choice.
Hmm.
When really it's like sometimes it's so nice just to step back and remember that we're there to build connections with our students and hopefully get one of them to just want to read sometimes, like to just sit and relax and enjoy reading. So for
Hmm.
me, that was something that was so memorable that I hope to do it again in the future because I had kids after that say, in my whole high school career, I've never had an English class go like that today. And it was so relaxing and I just loved it. So, I mean, that's not super funny or anything. It was just when you said memorable, that's what it made me think of.
Right.
But my kids
No,
make me
that's
laugh
that's an
all the
incredible.
time. So
No,
that's just
no,
what I
yeah.
thought of.
That's a beautiful memory, and I can guarantee you that those kids reflect back on that moment and still recall it, fondly. And I bet it warms their hearts, that to not only break routine, but to have that connection with someone in a position of authority, with a teacher. Because I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard, a lot of times that they're like, "Oh, I'm used to teachers being like this, and you're not like that," and or whatever, just
Exactly.
even little things. And that's an amazing thing to kind of break the mold of what they think the teacher is or should be.
That's so true. I love too when my students, like I knock on wood, I usually don't have an issue of earning my students' respect. And I think for a lot of students, that's hard to earn. And I've noticed that even with some of my older students are the ones that have the most of kind of an attitude, I can usually
Hmm.
gain their respect. And one time, this past Thanksgiving, I saw on someone's teacher Instagram, I can't remember who it is. I wish I could for a shout out, but they wrote for what they're thankful for Thanksgiving that year. They wrote down
Hmm.
every single of their students' names on this poster and said, "I'm thankful for like Sam's cheerfulness, Jennifer's enthusiasm," and went through every single student. And I was like, I was like, I feel like that would be so cool because I had a few classes that year that I just loved.
Hmm.
We teach in block classes, so we only have 3 classes, 90 minutes each. And I was like, I love my students this year. I'm going to do this. And so I spent probably like an hour or so making these posters. And then I hung them up on the wall for when my students came in and they just raised their hands, like, because I didn't address it because it's kind of awkward. I don't want to be like, hey, look at this thing I did for you guys. And so, like, I
Right.
started talking about the lesson for the day, and a student raised their hand and was like, Miss Stats, are you like just gonna ignore everything that's behind you right now? Like all of your like really sweet stuff that you wrote about us? And so I was like, okay, do you want me to read it? And they're
Oh.
like, yes, read it. And so
Oh.
I went through and I read everyone, and a student was like, Miss Stats, I just have to say, like, you did not have to do that. And the fact that you did really shows how much you love us. And I just really appreciate that because I've never felt like that with another teacher before, that they really genuinely love us. And
Wow.
something else that I've heard before from students that I think is really interesting, especially for like first year teachers who might be listening, who think that you have to have this kind of persona of you're really tough, you can be kind of cold and mean because you want to establish respect between your students. I think that
Hmm.
is a way to go in terms of you need to put your foot down. But what I've learned as a teacher is that if you treat a student like they're an adult, they love that. And I've had a student say
Hmm.
before, like my sophomores, because they are young, they're 15, 16 years old, but I talk to them like they're adults. And I've had a student tell me before, like, I feel like we all connect as a class well because you talk to us like we are adults, even though we're only teenagers. And so that's something I've
Wow.
really learned just based on what students tell me is that even if you don't think a 15-year-old can handle kind of a bigger conversation or certain responsibilities, if you put that on them, they usually rise to the occasion. And then they appreciate
Hmm.
you for it. They respect you for it, for treating them like they're older than they might be.
Right, right. Wow, there's so much to unpack there, I feel like. I
I
mean,
know,
you
sorry.
just
I just like
hit
talk and
no, no,
talk.
no. No, it's a great thing. Like, I'm just thinking, I don't know if you've read no, the reason why is because I just finished reviewing, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
No, I haven't. I've been wanting to read it, but I have not
I
read it
don't think
yet.
you have to read it. I don't think you need to read it because you pretty much that's what I was thinking. I was like, "Yep, she's got that and that one. That's number 4, that's number 5." Literally, because I just reviewed it yesterday because I think all of us as teachers, we kind of want to be on top of our game. And so I was reviewing yesterday and I'm planning on making an episode outlining it just for teachers, just the way
Oh, that's
I've kind
awesome.
of grown from it. And I was checking them off as you were saying it. I was like, the emotional bank account, you're depositing before you're withdrawing, you're being proactive because you're saying, you're stating your expectations, and they're rising to the occasion. Whereas I think a lot of teachers, and not to speak ill of anybody, but like if they'll
Mhm.
start like, okay, you're at 0, you need to earn the 100, versus what it sounds like how you're approaching is that you're at 100, and where you go from here is up to you.
Yeah, that's so true.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
so I'm thinking, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, just to kind of also level with, because when I came out of college, I already felt that this is who I was as a teacher. This is what I wanted. I wanted these strong relationships with students. And I also wanted
Mhm.
to be authentic about the fact that my first year of teaching was very difficult I had a really hard time disciplining. So if this is also like for the first year teacher who might be listening to this and thinking like,
Mhm.
oh, I just have to treat them like adults and they'll respect me and it'll be super easy, or like I can just be kind to students and it'll be super easy. I had a lot of growth between my first and second year because I realized that I worked so hard at school on making sure that my students were doing well, they're being successful, and to the point that I was really kind of exhausting myself because I felt like I was
Mhm.
working harder on those problem students to help them succeed than they were trying to help themselves. And I had a really hard time disciplining students because I hated being the mean teacher. I hate making people feel
Mhm.
bad or feel like they're less than me or anything like that. And so I let kids
Mhm.
kind of not like get away with things that were bad, but I should have been stricter. So it's such a
Mhm.
fine line and a balance that you have to work on. And for me, how I really dealt with that, between my first and second year, I was exhausted at the end of my first year. And I feel like students who wanted to take advantage of me knew how to take advantage of me, and it's not fair. So I actually
Mm.
read this book about setting boundaries, and a lot of it related to like family, your relationship with your significant other, and then work. And a lot of it was about coworker relationships and stuff like that. But I really worked hard to apply it to the classroom. And I read this
Mm.
book. I took a lot of notes about how I can apply it to my classroom. And it totally made me change the way I think about discipline. Because before this, I thought about I'm not being understanding enough if I hand a kid a detention for something they said or did that was wrong, or if a student fights back with me, maybe I need to just listen to them more. When really it's like, no, you're the teacher, you're in charge. You have a right to put your
Mhm.
foot down, and that's how it should
Mhm.
be. And if they cross your boundaries like that, they need to be put in their place. So I really learned to
Mhm.
look at discipline from an act of love because students need structure and they will always test the boundaries. And a lot of students actually thrive on discipline. Like they will flirt with the boundaries, but they
Right.
feel safer if you are put in your place and they see that other students are too, that they don't get away with stuff. So
Right.
I really worked hard on my second year, and I told my students, like, I just was very honest with them. I was like, look, last year, because we have repeat students sometimes as they go to different grades, and we change grade levels too. So I had some
Mhm.
students who were sophomores, and then the second year I had them again as juniors. And I said right in the beginning, I was like, look, if you knew me last year, I am still the same loving Miss Stats, but I have to be honest. I read this book about boundaries, and I cannot be working harder for your success than you are. And you have to respect me if I say that you need to sit a few plays out here or take a detention or go to the office. There's no fighting back with that. So even though I'm still the same teacher, I am a lot harder on you this year, but it's because I love you
Mhm.
guys and I want you to be the best versions of yourself. And I'm trying to teach you how to do that. So just for, like it took me a long way to get to be where I am now and trying to find the balance. And I still struggle with discipline and stuff like that. And that's how I know I probably won't be an administrator one day, but you never know. But like just to say that it's such a balance. And if you are a first year teacher and you feel like you're too strict or you're not strict enough, you'll figure it out.
Right. No, no, and I think that's a key distinction that needs to be made, and I hope I didn't gloss over, the serious disciplinary things that we have to deal with as teachers. And certainly from my first year to now, I think we've all grown, and that's a great thing. I
For
think
sure.
one of the key takeaways that I've learned is tact, because I feel like a lot of times during trainings or just mentor teachers, they'll say, don't smile until Christmas.
Yeah,
You can
so
either be
true.
their friend or don't smile till Christmas. And I remember thinking, it can't be that type of fallacy where it's like either A or B. Logically, you know
Exactly.
what I mean? There has to be something. And I remember a kid was like, "Man," and it came from a 6th grader that I had in alternative school. And he said, and I just remember I was like, "Yes, that's exactly what I was going for." He was like, "Man, sir, you're like cool but strict." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "You'll joke around with us, but as soon as we cross that line, bam." He's like, "But you're still nice. Like, you'll write us up and, like, smile and say, 'Do better tomorrow.'" And I'm
Oh my
like,
gosh, I would
"What?"
love if a student told me that. I'd be like, yes, I made it.
And I remember thinking, "Hey, we all have our good days and bad days, and that coulda just been a fluke, like, hey, I was less horrible than I am every other day or whatever," but I remember thinking, and because I had a mentor teacher that told me that, "Don't smile until Christmas or you're gonna wear
Right,
yourself out, and if you wanna last in this career field, do this, and don't be their friend, and bring the hammer hard." And I remember thinking
exactly.
there has to be a tactful way of still being strict, and I kinda developed this way of, I don't know if you've ever read. I'm big on self-improvement books.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale
Oh,
Carnegie.
that's on my list. I really wanna I
Oh
that's
my
literally, like, my
god.
next buy right now. It's on the top of my list.
If there were ever a book on life lessons, that book is incredible. I started, because I used to be in sales before I got into teaching, and then I applied it, and I was like, "This is just how to deal with people." It literally, how to build better relationships, and one of the things he says in there is like, "Be kind and be tactful. Think win-win." It's not about
Yeah,
you being right, it's not about them being wrong. Try to come up with a thing, and then I remember I would tell the kids, "Look, I have rules to follow. If I speed and I get a speeding ticket, does it make sense to get mad at the officer? No, he's
that's
just
so
doing his
true,
job trying to keep everybody else safe.
for
I'm the one
sure.
that was speeding and I knew the consequences." And so
Right.
once I was kind of explaining like that and saying, if I show up late to work or I'm dressed, casually, my principal, our boss, has every right to say, when you sign the contract, this is what we agreed upon. You're not holding up your end of the bargain. And so I would tell them that too. Our contract, even if it's just verbal, is I'll help you learn as much as I can, but you have to put in the effort. I can open the door, but I can't make you walk through it.
I love that.
Kind of building that relationship was like, hey, I'll help you, but you got to kind of try to, meet me halfway. I'm bending over backwards here, just like you said, burning yourself out and all that. And, it's not fair.
Exactly. I love the way you put it too in terms that they will understand. Because when you put it that way, it's like, oh, that's extremely logical and reasonable. Like, you're right. I don't have a reason to get mad at you if I'm throwing something across the room and I get in trouble for it.
Yeah, and then try to empathize with them. Like, look, imagine if this was being done to your little sister, or you had a sibling, and somebody else in that student's classroom was acting that way. Would you be happy with that? And a lot of them are like, no, of course not. So once you can kind of connect with them, but one thing I've really had to, I think we all kind of struggle with teachers as a balance is controlling our emotions in that moment.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I feel because
I'm
sometimes it
sorry,
could
I went
feel
off on
like,
a tangent
oh, no, I was gonna say, I completely agree with that because I remember one time when I was a student teacher, I was just so happy go lucky all the time, and I was having a really hard day because I had to discipline someone about copying off someone else, and I just was in a really bad mood, and I was showing students how they should be citing their resources on the board, and I turn around,
there. Uh-huh.
and this kid is like leaning back in his chair and talking to the kid behind him. And I was just like,
Hmm.
oh, Jameson! And he literally looked like he saw a ghost. And I was like, how disrespectful! You know I'm up here trying to help you, and you're not even listening. And it was something that, like, that happens all the time with teenagers, and that's not a normal reaction for a
Right.
teacher. But I just was like in
Uh-huh.
such a mood, and I was just a student teacher. So usually like everyone wants to be friends with the student teacher, but this kid tested me and I was so frustrated by it. And so
Hmm.
afterwards, I had a talk with him and I was like, I'm really sorry that I reacted like that. That was not okay for me to respond that way, but do you understand why I was so frustrated? And we were able to have a conversation about that. But yeah, exactly. And that's something you learn as you grow as a teacher is how to manage those emotions when students may act out in some
Hmm.
way, and it just gets easier.
Mhm, mhm, and I like that you were able to, apologize to a student because I know a lot of teachers don't wanna lose that power struggle,
For sure,
or they
yeah.
might they're not comfortable with it, but I think that goes a long way, being able to connect with your student and say you're sorry, and call out your own mistakes. I think that definitely models like a growth mindset.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it goes back to student relationships. It shows that we're human too, and we're not perfect all the time.
Right, right. And I think that ties into the other question I had for you was, what advice would you give to yourself in your first year of teaching?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think
And it
that,
could be more than one thing. I'm sure you've
right.
grown so much.
I do feel like I've grown so much. I think that I have learned kind of what I said about setting boundaries. That was a huge life lesson for me that I had to learn the hard way. I learned to stop taking things home with me. I would have, I had a really, really hard D block is what it's called, our last block of the day, my first year of teaching, where they were just the rowdiest group and I had the hardest time controlling them. And every single day I took that home with me and I felt like I was a failure because it was chaotic. And I was just upset every single day to the point where it would ruin my whole night. So that was something where I learned, I was like, I really need to A, figure out how to control this insane class, B, forgive myself. I'm learning too, and I shouldn't have to take stuff home when you should leave at 4 p.m. Like, I shouldn't have to take these things home and let it be my life where I'm just really upset about it all the time. So I really try to teach myself to have grace with myself and that I'm trying the best I can. And I hope that, other first year teachers, if they go through the same thing, that they learn to kind of advocate for themselves and like go home when they should. Like the work will always be there tomorrow. You don't have to stay till 7 p.m. like I did way too many times. And really, like I said, like I think it's so much about just building those relationships with students, but setting boundaries and being strict about, like, I deserve to go home right now and I deserve to not have to think about what happened at school today. I'll deal with it tomorrow. That kind of thing.
Right. And sometimes that's the most intelligent thing to do, to put it down and just deal with it another day.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah. Sometimes, and it's even just in life, if something happens and it totally sends you on a whirlwind of emotion, sometimes you do just need to step back and let yourself take a break from it. And then you can approach it when you feel a little bit better and realize that it was not that severe as you thought it was. And it's totally like a manageable problem that you just need to figure out. And it's so much easier to step away from something and let yourself kind of breathe and then come back to it.
Right. That perspective. And so when did you realize you wanted to be a teacher? Was there a specific moment, or was it just kind of came about, or?
So I have always wanted to be a teacher since I was little. My mom, she was a third grade teacher growing up. So my twin sister and I actually went to the elementary school that she taught at. So every morning and after school, when we were waiting for my mom to finish up what she needed to get done, we would play in her classroom and play school and stuff like that. And even in my family's basement at home, my parents set up a little classroom for us. So I have the funniest memories of me being the teacher and my two sisters sitting in student desks and listening to my lessons. And I remember they would just get so annoyed with me because I'd want them to work on worksheets after my lesson I gave them. And then they would act out and be like, we don't want to do this, Miss Stats. And then I would just kind of be like, let me put this teaching aside. Can you guys please behave? Like, you're being really annoying right now. And it's just so funny because now it's like that's real life, except you have to tell the students like, hey, this actually is real, and can you stop being your normal self of just being really sassy right now? So I've always wanted to be a teacher. When I was in high school, I joined a career tech program for future teachers. And then I didn't know what type of teacher I wanted to be. I didn't know if I wanted to do elementary or middle school or high school. But towards the end, I knew I really wanted to work with older kids because I feel like that is the group where so many adults are like, ugh, how do you ever work with teenagers? Like, they are so sassy. They are ungrateful and all this stuff. And I'm like, I mean, sometimes, but they're teenagers. Like, they're adolescents. They're growing. They're in a vulnerable stage in their lives, and they're in a pivotal point in their lives. And sometimes they don't have role models to guide them towards a bigger life for themselves, something like going to college or finding a trade or a career. And that was something
Right.
that was so impactful to me, is that we as teachers, high school especially, have the power to take those kids who may be lost and just give them a little bit of guidance and support and push them into a totally different life than they envisioned for themselves. Something that may, if they came from a hard home life and they never thought that they could be someone someday, you have the power to show them how amazing they are and that they are capable of being someone successful. So to me, like, those are the
Wow.
reasons why I stayed. Like, that got me into teaching, but this is why I stay, is that power of being able to
Wow.
touch kids who may not have someone in their lives to do that for them.
Man, that's powerful. That's beautifully said. I mean, and
Thank
I hope
you.
have you ever been asked to mentor somebody, like, formally, a newer teacher or anything like that?
No, well, I had taken some student teachers and stuff, but you're at my school. You're
Uh-huh.
not allowed to take a student teacher until I
Mhm.
think year 5 of teaching. So
Oh,
I
okay.
so I haven't been able to be like a mentor, but I take in kids who are doing college experiences, that kind of thing. But
That's awesome. So how long have you been teaching, if you don't mind me asking?
oh no, this is actually going to be my 3rd year. So I've been at the school.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been at the school for it's going to be my 4th year, because the school I teach at was the school I student taught at. And then I just got really
Mhm.
lucky where there was a job position open and I applied for it and got it. So I was super excited. It was right before my college graduation when I found out that I got the job. So it was such a huge relief that I knew that I had a job right out of college. So I've been there for going on my 4th
Wow.
year.
And I'm sorry for my reaction. The only reason, not in a negative way, I'm just blown away that you grew that much in that amount of time. I've been doing this for
Thank
12
you.
years, and I feel like I'm
Yeah.
barely kind of realizing, like, "Okay, this is what I need to be doing." But wow.
Yeah, I
Wow. So
my
there's no
students will
telling where you'll be
always.
in 10.
I know,
I'm sorry, go
it's
ahead.
exciting. Oh, no, I was gonna say, like, it's just funny because if like, my students, they ask every single year how old I am, and for the most part, like, I've been there a
Uh-huh.
few years now, so they know me. A lot of them know, and they know what kind of teacher I am, but, that first year of teaching, they looked at me and they're like, "How old even are you? Like, are you even qualified to be teaching?" And I'm like,
Oh,
yes,
that's
actually,
funny.
I have my degree. Thanks so much for your concern."
Oh, that's so funny. That's so
So yeah,
funny.
so even like going into
Um,
my 3rd year, I feel so much more confident. Like, if a kid asks me how old I am, I won't tell them, but I'll be like, "Look, I'm old enough, okay?"
right, right, right. Wow, so it really sounds like the teaching was, like, in your blood, like, that was your destiny from a young age.
I think it was. Yeah, and it's definitely interesting to see. Like, I don't know where my life will go from here. I don't know if, cuz I'm in the point in my career where I'm thinking about my masters, and I'm at a kind of weird path where I'm deciding, do I want to be a counselor? Do I want to keep teaching and just get my master's in something different? Would I want to be a college professor? It's such a hard point in your life where you need to think logistically of, like, what's my next move. And it's hard because I'm happy where
Mhm.
I am now. So, but it's like, will you be happy 20 years from now as a teacher? Like, what will the world even look like? No one could have ever expected it would look like
Right,
what it does now with COVID and everything. So
right.
it's really interesting as a teacher. You're constantly thinking about, what is your next move?
Right, right, and I think that's a beautiful kind of it's a bittersweet problem to have, right? There's so many
For
possibilities, but
sure.
at the same time, there's so many, like, unknowns.
Right. Absolutely.
I wanted to also kind of have you reflect on your teaching, like, those meaningful books that you've chosen, and in your past experience, has there been anything that, really resonated with your kids in terms of life lessons or anything that they really took away that was, like, at a really deep level of learning?
Yeah, I really try my hardest to make everything I teach relate to their lives. So Kind of like I said before, even if it's not something that they have gone through themselves, they can hopefully learn to understand those around them a little bit better. So thinking about Perks of Being a Wallflower, because that one is so, it's a very deep novel, and it's, even though it's kind of an easier read, the concepts are more complex for students. It has a lot about mental health and like sexual abuse and stuff like that. So they're very heavy topics, but I choose to teach it to my students every year because if that is something that they're dealing with, and so many of my students are open about their mental health issues, which I love, and that's something I celebrate in my class, but I want them to know that they're not alone. And some life lessons I really like to look for in that book, of course, is showing my kids that they are never alone wherever they're at in life. And if they are in a hard time in their lives, there's light at the end of the tunnel, just like the end of Perks Being a Wallflower. And just life in general, it's hard when a kid comes to you crying about like getting dumped or something like that, and you're trying to tell them like, you're only 15 or 16 years old. I promise this probably won't even impact you 3 months from now, because they don't see it that way. Like, their lives are so intense with the emotions that they're feeling at that age that they think that one bad thing that happens is set in stone for the rest of their lives. So with Perks of Being a Wallflower, I really try to show them what healthy friendships and relationships look like, because that's something that I've really noticed about teenagers especially, is that they can't decipher between what's healthy and unhealthy behavior in relationships especially. Like, I've had students come to me and say that they're afraid that their significant other is going to walk into the room and hurt them. And I'm like, you shouldn't have to feel that way though. Like, that's not healthy behavior. So that's something like when they're younger like that, I really try to teach them lessons of what you deserve. And that's not like a standard in English, you know, that's not something we're supposed to teach them, but it's something that's so important to me that if they can recognize what they need or deserve in life, then that is my goal, is that they can see a relationship that's not healthy and maybe put a stop to it. Or I think about The Glass Castle. One of the, when I was reading that book, one of the things that happens in that book is that Jeanette makes friends with this girl named Denisha, and Denisha, she kind of tells her story a little bit. It's really, she's a very minor character, but I think she has a very powerful role, where Denisha ends up asking Jeanette about baby names, and they're in high school, so we know that Denisha gets pregnant. And then Jeanette says later that Denisha was arrested because she stabbed her mother's boyfriend to death. So it's you can kind of put together what had happened to Denisha. And that's something that I think is really, really important for my students. And so I kind of jump off that and give the lesson of domestic violence. And one of the projects I do in that class, or when I'm teaching The Glass Castle, and I teach it to older students. I'm not exactly sure how well sophomores would process this kind of thing, but when I taught seniors and I taught The Glass Castle, I did this project about domestic violence awareness. And basically, in Denisha's honor for the injustice that she was given, they have to create a newspaper spread about domestic violence. And so they actually go to the website, like the national website for domestic violence, and they have to research all these different things that I have set as requirements. And then they have to display it like it'll be hung up in the school to help other people like Denisha who need the help. And like, that's not the perception, is that I just want them to raise awareness, but really my goal for it is that if they are ever in a situation in life after high school where people can't protect them anymore, if they're in a dangerous situation, a dangerous relationship, they've already been to the domestic violence website because of my class. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to, at least, if they can't recognize the signs that they're not in a healthy relationship, I hope if they need help, they'll know to go to that website and hopefully seek help and resources, or ask a friend for support or something like that. So even if some kids forget about what I taught them in English, I'm hoping that life lessons like that will stick with them, that they'll know how to advocate for themselves if they're ever in trouble after high school.
Wow. Wow, that's great. I mean, just tying those in, the real life lessons to, not only literature, but to discussions and everything else like that. That's invaluable. I feel like that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really, I try to do that too. Like, and Dear Martin is new for me this year, and I'm really excited to see how it goes. But I think that my real purpose in that is just to help students be more self aware. Like, obviously, they're going to learn a lot about like overt and covert racism and all these really, really important lessons about the movement that we need to be talking about. But then if there's that student who thinks that like all lives matter or different things like that, I'm hoping that the resources I give them, it just teaches them to reflect and to not be so judgmental and think that they know everything, but just to sit and listen and not argue, just
Right.
listen. And that is exactly what I hope to have happen, to where then when they're out of high school, if they can't be strong advocates, at least they can just be listeners. And that to me would make a huge difference in changing the world. So that's why I really want to teach Dear Martin. I want to help people be more self-aware. And then also for those students who are Black and brown students, I want them to feel like their voice and their stories are heard and they're being told and they're respected and loved and they deserve to tell their stories to other people. So that's really my goal with the life lessons that come out of Dear Martin.
Man, that's beautiful. And it reminds me, kind of like you're the Zen master in this story that I just read a little while ago, or like recently. It's an awesome little Zen fable, and it's an archery master with his student, and the student is at a local archery contest, and he's showing off and hitting bullseye after bullseye after bullseye, and all the crowd's like going crazy and cheering for him, and and he's just like showing off. He's not even looking at the target and just making bullseye after bullseye, and he's looking at his master like, "Look how good I am. You should be proud of me." And the master's not really impressed, and he's just watching him, calmly. And after everything's over, the student comes up to the master and says, "Did you see what I was doing? Like, you taught me, and this is how good I've gotten." And the master calmly replies, "You have yet to learn that the target is not the target."
Oh, I love that.
And
That's cool.
I love it too. And so that's what I really feel like. Yeah, like you said, yeah, you're learning, covert and overt racism, and reading, and you're increasing reading comprehension skills and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But at a deeper, level, you're really, increasing awareness and helping them become better people, and at least, being more
So
aware
true.
of what is out there. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. So, before we go, I know you have probably a million things to do, and thank you so much for making time for this episode. Is there anyone you'd like to give a shout out to, or anything else you'd like listeners to know about you?
I'm so excited that I was able to be on your podcast. I really have loved spending time talking about all these awesome things. If I could give a little shout out to my family, of course, my close friends who know that I was going to be on the podcast, and it was my first podcast, and they were all so supportive and excited for me. My fiance, Matt, and of course, our dog, Beckett, who I know is just extremely supportive.
Awesome. And where can our listeners find you?
I am on Instagram, the Fearless English Teacher. I am also on Teachers Pay Teachers, same name, the Fearless English Teacher. I'm working on building my Pinterest, so you could always find me on there, and I'm really going to try and shape it up. And then I currently have a blog in the works that I'm still working on, but that's www.thefearlessenglishteacher.com.
Wonderful. So all you listeners out there, go check her out. She's doing amazing things in and out of the classroom, and the honor's all ours to have her here and give, her valuable time, especially valuable time on the weekend, to make time for an episode. We really appreciate that. And thank you again for everything you do, Alli. We really do appreciate everything you're doing out there.
Of course. Thank you so much for making this podcast and inviting me. I think it's amazing.
Of course. Thank you. The honor's all ours. And it's people like you, that this is probably going to outrank all the other episodes, which is great. You know what I mean? Putting this content out there, it's a long form discussion. And I hope our listeners can can gather and learn something, and at least we can, spark some thought and discussions, because that's always a good thing.
Of course, yeah.
Well, thank you again, Alli. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you again for tuning in. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, share, and consider leaving a review. It really does help. We make resources for teachers by teachers. Check us out at shiningscholareducation.com and at our Teachers Pay Teachers store as well. We'd love to hear from you, so email us at shiningscholareducation@gmail.com to share any questions or topics you'd like on the show. Thank you for all you do, teachers, and keep changing the world.